Well, I'm here again, trying to do another video. Just finished my dinner, and I should have brushed my teeth before I came back to the computer. First, I want to show you this pretty tulip. I don't know what kind of tulip this is called, but it's one that my daughter sent me in a big, huge bouquet, and I wanted you to see a close-up of the tulip. I haven't seen any around here that look like this. But anyway, she sent me this beautiful bouquet, and I think she was on a guilt trip because she's in South Carolina this week, and it's kind of like she didn't invite me to go with her. So I'll send her some pretty tulips. She likes tulips. Yes, I like tulips, and they were a big surprise to me, but I'm pleased to get them. Now, this video may just cut off anytime because my battery's low, and I don't know how long it'll take for it to go out on me. So, first, I thought, well, this is Mother's Day weekend. The funny thing about that was, Jan's friend Susan called me and said, would you like to go to dinner with Mom and me on Mother's Day? And I said, Mother's Day was last Sunday. She laughed. She said, Mother's Day is this coming Sunday. I said, well, I was wondering why I wasn't seeing very many tributes on Facebook about everybody's mother. I thought it was last Sunday. Didn't know the difference. Yeah, well, didn't make any difference, to tell the truth. But I was thinking, did I do a Mother's Day video last year, and what did I say? Well, I started looking, goodness gracious alive. I looked, and I listened, and I watched myself on video, and I was getting a little sick of looking at me. And I thought, the heck with it, I'll just do another one, and maybe I'm going to repeat myself, but some people, if they're like me, if I'm going to forget it, they'll forget it too. But what I want to do first, I want to show you one picture of my mother. I don't know why my nose always itches every time I start a new video. Anyway, I want to show you this picture of my mother. Now, we didn't have many pictures made in our family because, for one thing, we didn't have camera. For another thing, we couldn't afford all those flash bulbs and getting them developed and everything. So we just don't have a library of photographs. But I've got this one picture of my mother, and I'm going to say it's my favorite. Now, this picture, I'm assuming, was taken about 1935. And I want you to see what she looked like. I think you have to consider one thing now when I show you this picture. Let's see if I can, pooey. Wouldn't you know I'd do something like that? Okay, come back to me. Well, I'll be doggone. We'll get it back. I'll get it back for you because I want you to see it. I'm going to see if I can get it on here right this time. Okay, let's get it up here close. Now, this was in our backyard. See the dress she's wearing? Look like it has a little cape. This is not a very good angle. Makes her look warped. Anyway, I'm guessing this was about 1935. And that was the year before I was born. And I was baby number 10. So that's what my mother looked like. just before I was born. I love her dress. That's a long rose bush going up the side of the yard in the house next door. So you see what this lady looked like when she was 39 years old and had had 9 babies already. Okay, we'll leave that be. That's the picture you're going to get to see of my mother. Now, I don't know quite where to start because a lot of you seem to be interested in my mother's history. Keep in mind, she was born 126 years ago. My mother, 126 years ago. So she had quite a long life. In fact, if she had lived another year and a half, she would have seen 3 centuries. The end of the 19th century. She lived through the 20th century and was approaching the 21st century when she died. Not many people can say that. So I'm going to start at the beginning. She was born 1897. She lived through a bunch of wars, diseases. You know, I think I'll get up to where when she's married, she's had her first baby and pregnant with her second baby. My mother experienced the influenza epidemic of 1918. Now, you know all about that. You know the millions of people died during that epidemic. My dad, my mother, and my oldest sister, all 3 had the epidemic. They were living in a little log cabin. I don't know what it was like for her. She never really talked about these things. She would talk about it if I was asking her questions. But she said they were too sick to do anything for themselves. And my dad was the kind of man, never missed a day's work. Never. But he missed work during the flu epidemic. So my grandfather and my uncle by marriage, they were the only ones in the whole family, and these were big families. You found most of the families were 8 to 13 babies born. And I've come to the conclusion the reason there were 13, and they stopped at 13, is because that was just about the time women went through menopause. When you reached your 13th baby, menopause was next. So that ended the clan. Anyway, they were very sick. My uncle and my grandfather, they would come and they would stoke the fires and keep the house warm by adding coal and wood to the stove. One of those pot-bellied stoves, if you've ever seen one. And they would make soup. Now, I can't imagine what kind of soup those men made because men didn't cook back then. That was a woman's job. But anyway, they survived the flu epidemic. My mother also was at home alone with the baby when the flash flood came through. There she was. Daddy's working for the railroad. He's having to go off in one of the trains, back and forth. And she's walking the floor with her baby. All right, let's go move on ahead. And Daddy's not working for the railroad anymore. He's a carpenter and a builder. And he wasn't home too much. Now, there was my oldest sister. By then, she's 7 years old. She's sick with tonsillitis. I've already told you this story. The doctor comes. He performed the tonsillectomy on the kitchen table with my mother watching and my dad assisting. Now, you know that couldn't have been an easy thing for a young mother. We go on through life. I'm trying to think of things that were important. Now, Mama never had a job away from home. Her life was in the home. She was a homemaker. All of her work was in the home, but she had plenty of work. You think of all of those diapers she had to wash, and baby clothes and kid clothes she had to wash and iron. Everything got ironed. And babies' diapers had to be washed every day because you didn't have a big supply of Pampers. Now, Mama had been born and raised on a big farm. I'm talking about a farm that produced vegetables and fruits for the market. She worked just like the boys worked. She hoed and she plowed and she did everything that had to be done on the farm. She plucked the ducks, the down, what do you call it? Down. You know, your feather beds and your feather pillows were made of down. So she plucked the down to make the feather beds and the feather and all. She helped and learned to sew. She was crocheting when she was a child. Very few things were bought that if they could be made at home. And there was no child in the family that got out of doing farm work. She even passed out in the field of corn. It was so hot. They had to carry her to the house. Her and her sister had to be carried to the house because they had fainted from heat. Now, she was working her entire life just like her parents did. One baby after another. The doctor came to the house, delivered each child. Mama learned all about home remedies. She could tell you all the plants and the herbs and I can't even begin to name them because I never learned them. I didn't want to learn them. Mama knew them. That was good enough for me. Because I remember when I was in the 4th grade, I got the hives. If you ever had the hives, well, you don't want to ever get the hives if you can avoid it. In my case, I had the hives and affected my eyes. When I'd wake up in the morning, my eyes would be swollen together. And I'd have to feel my way from the bedroom to the kitchen. And Mama would have a pan of warm salt water. And she would bathe my eyes until I could open them to see. That wasn't a good experience, but she knew what to do, and she took care of it, and we didn't go to the doctor. Couldn't afford to go to the doctor. If you went to the doctor, most people didn't have enough money to pay in full, and you'd pay $1 a week on your doctor bill. You paid in payments for most anything you bought. Didn't have credit cards back then. Gosh, how great that would have been. You either paid cash or you went to the bank and you borrowed the money for whatever you needed. Well, let's see. Let's go from there. I told you about her finding out I got hit in the back of the head with the baseball. And I wasn't going to tell her because she'd already warned me. She's always warning me, you don't need to do this, you don't need to do that. You're going to get hurt. Everything you liable to get hurt. She was so concerned about keeping us healthy. And, of course, Vicks Salve was probably the lifesaver in our family. Plus a little bit of whiskey in a bottle, about that much whiskey in the bottle. And it stayed back behind her good dishes in a little cabinet against the wall. That way, if anybody opened the cabinet door, they wouldn't see alcohol. You know, people were funny about that. We lived in a dry county, too. Mama never went to any of the affairs at school. I don't know why. She was actually very busy at home. By the time she did the washing, the ironing, the housekeeping, the mending, the sewing, making dresses for us girls, she didn't have time to do anything else. She couldn't have held down a full-time job. She had a full-time job at home. She could answer any question that had to do with housekeeping, cooking, medicines. She knew all that stuff. She knew the astrological signs. She could tell you about, like, the time. She always kept track of where the signs were. The signs were in the head. Oh, you didn't go to the doctor. You didn't go to the dentist because you would bleed. That was the way it was. Everybody believed it. You had those strange things. Don't walk under a ladder, it's bad luck. Oh, the old folk believed all that stuff. In fact, I guess we kids did too, because we wouldn't walk under a ladder. We wouldn't let a black cat cross our path. And if you spilled the salt shaker, if you spilled it, my battery sign came on. If you spill the salt, you had to throw the salt over your shoulder so that you wouldn't have bad luck. I'm going to say my mother was the matriarch of the neighborhood. We lived in an old neighborhood. When the couples moved there, they stayed until they died. They raised their families there, and some of them, the children took over the house after they died. So Mama was the last. There were probably a dozen families in her age bracket. One at a time, they were gone, and Mama was the last one left. She was the one they came to when they needed to know what kind of medicine to give their sick baby. She was the one they came to when they wanted to borrow a cup of sugar or 2 eggs to bake a cake with. She was the one they came to for advice about what to do with their children. Anything you wanted to know, the neighbors asked my mother. Now, I don't know how you would place her in the way of life. She didn't go to things at school. If we were in programs at school, she just didn't go. I don't know why. Never knew why. we just took it for granted that Mama's at home. She's cooking, fixing breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which we call breakfast, dinner, and supper. She was very loyal to her church. Every night, she read her Bible before she went to bed. Every night after the supper dishes were done, she sat in the Boston rocker across the room from Daddy. Daddy would be listening to the radio. This was before we had television. He would be listening to the radio, usually listening to ball games, baseball, basketball, Cincinnati Reds, that sort of thing. Oh, and he loved boxing. That was back in the days of Joe Louis. And he would lean toward the radio, get close to the radio so he didn't miss a word of what the announcer had to say. So he would be there, and she'd be doing her crocheting. She crocheted every night, just as naturally. She didn't have to even look at it. Her fingers were just going back and forth, and I think, how in the world do you know what you're doing and how to count the stitches? But she'd been doing it all her life. It just came so natural for her. So while she did her crocheting, Daddy was listening to the radio. And that was life. This was after most of us kids were grown. Now, the one thing I don't want to forget, my mother had 13 babies. She raised 9 of them. The first baby was a blue baby. And if you don't know what a blue baby is, well, it's where the father and the mother's blood doesn't mix. And then they didn't know how to do transfusions, so the babies usually died shortly after they were born. So the third baby in the family died as a blue baby. We come on down to, let's see, the seventh baby. Seventh baby was a little girl. All the neighbors said she was the prettiest one yet, and she was the sweetest one yet. She died when she was 2 years old of dysentery. Now, just to show you one of the things that my mother went through. This baby was being rocked by my mother. It took several weeks before she died. But while she was caring for this baby, my older sister, Ada, and my older brother, the one who was killed in the war, they had pneumonia. They were in bed with pneumonia, and old Doc Smith was there sitting by the bed expecting them to die. Now you think about that. Three children deathly ill at the same time. The baby died, but my sister and my brother got over the pneumonia. The neighbors built the little casket for my sister. Just a little wooden casket like you've seen in a lot of movies. Now the picture I showed you, the dress that my mother had on, I have a picture of her standing beside my sister's grave wearing that dress. We go on. Oh, the childhood illnesses, the things that keep you home from school, the earaches, the tonsillitis, all of that. It was just one child after another. And the measles and a chicken pox. 9 children. She dealt with that with 9 children. Then along comes World War II. Not only that, we had the Depression years. When you can't find a job, there are no jobs. The rich and the poor lived the same. The rich lost all their money, the poor didn't have any money, and they were all going hungry. What do you do when you have 9 children? Who's going to feed those children? Daddy took any and every job he could get. And even the little neighborhood grocery, he would do odd jobs for the lady that owned that little grocery. And when he would go by the store to get a few items of necessary food for the family, she would add a quart of milk to his grocery sack. He wouldn't know it was there till he got home, and Mama would discover she had added enough milk. Now, I remember my oldest sister saying to me, I believe the only thing I ever really wanted in life was a full glass of milk when I sat down at the table to eat supper. Now you think about that. That's not so much to be asking for, but it was so important during the Depression when everybody was having problems. They didn't have enough food to eat. But Mama, she knew how to stretch a dollar. She knew how to stretch her meals. She could make enough gravy to feed the neighborhood. She could put out enough biscuits that'd make a chain from here to China. She could cut up a chicken in so many pieces, you'd say, this can't be one chicken, gotta be 2 chickens she's been working with. But she knew how to cut up a chicken. She knew how to make things stretch. It was a talent for her, an actual talent. As she got older, we married all one at a time, emptying the nest. But my oldest sister lived across the street from our house. Daddy had built our house in 1924. Next year, that house will be 100 years old. My sister bought the 3 acres of land across the street from our house, and Daddy built her house. So, when the nest was emptied, Mama was getting old. Daddy died in 1976. But first, I need to go back to World War II. We've gotten through the Depression. Now we're in World War II. And we moved from town to town, state to state, when Daddy had a long-lasting job. We would go with him. We're in Tennessee 2 months during the Manhattan Project. Daddy was building houses and dormitories for the Manhattan Project. We were there 2 months when we got the notice that my brother had been killed in a B-17 bomber. He was 21 years old. That was a traumatic time with all of the worries about the war, about the Japanese attacking the United States, which was the #1 enemy target, 11 miles from where we lived. There's an every day, every hour constant worry. Would the Japanese attack the United States again like they did in Pearl Harbor? All right, we get through the war. We're back home. Now, I'm up to where we were all married. Daddy gets cancer. He dies in 1976 at the age of 80. Mama's home alone. First time in her life. She's home alone. Well, it worked okay because my sister was across the street. So when Mama got into her 80s, my sister would cook supper every night. This was just standard. She was a wonderful cook. And at 6 o'clock every night, she brought over a plate of dinner for Mama. Well, she was my mother's caretaker, no question about it. Saw to her groceries. Mama would go with my 2 older sisters to the grocery. Their husbands would take them once a week. They'd go to the A&P, buy their groceries. Well, in 1992, my oldest sister, living across the street, got cancer. She died January 1992. Actually, she'd had cancer for 2 years. So in January 1992, she was buried. Mama panicked. Her life support was gone. What was she going to do? So from then on, there was hired help that would come and spend the nights with my mother. This went on until she turned 99. She couldn't stay in the house by herself anymore. She'd already had a bout of pneumonia. She got through that just fine. We actually thought she was dying. She came out of that just like that. I don't know how she managed to do it. So we were in a position of what we were going to do. Mama wouldn't come and live with any of us. She wanted us to come and live with her. But none of us could. And it just didn't make sense that we would, because they all had their own homes. And I was working in Tennessee. And I'd come on weekends and visit Mama. 70-mile drive. So, at the age of 101 and a half, my mother died. Sound mind. She could still walk. Not as well as you'd hope, but the staff at the nursing home liked her because she could communicate with them. She knew what she was doing. She knew what she was talking about. And she loved to tell stories about her family. She liked talking about her family. And they were kind enough to listen. They liked listening to her stories. So, 101 and 6 months lifetime. You've seen what my mother went through. The trials. There were good times. She never looked on it as, oh, poor me. Never. That was life. That's just how life was. She was used to living on a farm where you did what you had to do. And you took it in stride. You didn't